When the residents of the quiet town of Halebridge heard the rumble in the sky, they thought it was an unseasonable thunderstorm. But it wasn't lightning that struck the forest. It was a military helicopter, destroyed in the middle of American territory during a mission that officially never took place. No emergency call, no explanation, just charred bodies and a single intact box. A box that disappeared into the hands of the government before anyone could see what was inside. From that moment on, the city never slept soundly again. It was just after 2 in the morning when the sky over Halebridge was ripped apart by a guttural, metallic and high-pitched sound, something that couldn't be mistaken for a commercial airliner or an ordinary helicopter. The dogs started howling even before the bang, and the city lights flickered in sync with a subtle tremor in the ground. Some windows shattered on their own, as if a pressure wave had swept through the city before anyone understood what was happening. Marge Wallace, a retired nurse, was looking out of her kitchen window when she saw the flames cutting across the sky and a trail of black smoke forming over the forest to the north. She could still describe it days later, her hands shaking and her voice failing. It didn't come down like a helicopter. It was as if being pulled down. That night, Marge called the police, the fire department, and even an old friend at the nearby airbase. No one answered, not at that time. The next morning, the forest smelled of burnt kerosene and meat. The smoke still rose in thick columns, visible even from the interstate highway. Whatever had fallen there, it wasn't just an accident, not with that kind of silence from the authorities, and not with the black helicopters flying over the area less than 20 minutes after the impact. The first to arrive weren't the feds. They were 2 teenagers following the sounds with cell phones in hand. Their video was never published, but it circulated in local WhatsApp groups for a few hours. In it, you could see debris scattered like leaves torn from a book, unrecognizable bodies among pieces of molten metal, and something huge being loaded by a crane with a military logo blacked out. When Sheriff Clyde Monroe finally made it through the makeshift barriers at the rural access, it was too late. Uniformed men, no insignia, no identification, controlled everything. They said dry phrases over and over as if they were trained. Containment zone, biological risk, not authorized. The sheriff, a war veteran and a stubborn man, tried to insist. It didn't last long. 2 soldiers pushed him back into the car and told him that if he took another step, there would be legal consequences. But he saw something before he was driven away. A dark, square, almost intact metal box being placed on a truck with an unknown symbol. There were no Air Force or National Guard markings, just 3 circular lines engraved with millimeter precision, and a flashing red light in the bottom left-hand corner of the box, as if it were still connected to something alive. At the Halebridge morgue, only 4 bodies arrived. According to local records, the helicopter was supposed to carry a maximum of 5 people, but the remains indicated that there were at least 8 crew members on board. 3 of them were never identified. No fingerprints, no dental exams, no DNA. As if officially, those people had never existed. The coroner, Dr. Janine Cobb, had to sign reports without having access to the medical records of the dead. One of the bodies, or what was left of it, had a jaw broken in 2 places, but no trauma compatible with a fall. Another had symmetrical lacerations on his back, which looked more like surgical incisions than accidental injuries. But none of this made it into the final report. The feds reviewed every word. Then they disappeared with the digital files and even took the backup from the morgue server. What disturbed Janine most, however, wasn't the bodies. It was a small, folded piece of paper found inside the boot of one of the dead. It was partially burnt, but it was still possible to read. If they open the box, it's all over. It was handwritten, and it had been written in such a hurry that there was blood on the corner of the sheet. The box, which seemed to be made of an unknown alloy, had withstood the impact and the fire. Even among the charred wreckage, it kept its surface clean, almost immune to the surrounding environment. Technicians in containment suits surrounded it, analyzing its joints and issuing orders in a technical dialect that no one from Halebridge understood. It was placed in an armored container and taken out of the forest under escort, as if it were nuclear material. 2 trucks with diplomatic plates crossed the town at high speed, while drones flew over the route to make sure no one followed them. The press only arrived the next day, too late to capture any useful images. What appeared in the news was only what the government allowed. Empty images, burnt trails, and generic statements about aircraft crashed on a training mission. But the conversations in the bars, churches, supermarket queues, they said something else. They said that the box contained something that no one should find. They said it was vibrating when it was taken out, that there was a pulse. And one of the rescue team, before disappearing, swore he heard sounds coming from inside. Not voices, but something like a heartbeat. 2 days later, they began to appear. Dark suits, sunglasses, black cars without license plates. They didn't ask, they ordered. They visited houses, collected cell phones, took computers. They said it was national security protocol, but they never showed a warrant. People were afraid. Halebridge was a small town where everyone knew each other, and the presence of these expressionless men froze even the toughest of people. Pastor Gregory, from the local Baptist church, was one of the first to be questioned. They wanted to know if he had made any recordings on the night of the accident, if he had received any anonymous messages, if anyone had confessed about what they had seen. When he denied everything, they just said, "Remember what happened to Reverend Everett in Cedar Hills?" Gregory didn't understand, but the next night, he was found inside the church itself, locked in the pulpit, repeating over and over, "The box shouldn't have been opened. It shouldn't." Meanwhile, a local journalist called Ricky Delmar was trying to put the pieces together on his own. He began interviewing local residents, gathering old images of the area, and comparing them with data from the flight. He discovered that the helicopter with registration number 4KZ19B was not on any list of military takeoffs, neither from the nearest base nor from any other on the East Coast. It was as if it had gone nowhere and disappeared forever, except for the box. Ricky Delmar continued his investigation, even under threatening stares. On Thursday afternoon, he managed to arrange a conversation with a civilian employee at the Fairmont base, 120 miles from Halebridge. The man, who introduced himself only as Dennis, seemed tense, sweating even with the air conditioning on. He said something vague about unclassified transports and orders coming straight from Washington before interrupting himself and looking around as if he were being watched. Dennis mentioned handing Ricky a USB stick, but didn't complete the gesture. A black pickup truck pulled up on the other side of the road. 2 men got out, without hurrying, and just watched them through the glass. Dennis shut up immediately. He got up, apologized, and left through the back door of the restaurant without even looking back. Ricky stood there, his heart racing, realizing that, at that moment, he had crossed a line from which he could no longer return. The next morning, Dennis was reported missing. His house, found open and ransacked, showed no signs of a struggle, only absence. Cell phone, wallet, documents. Everything was there. Everything but him. The pen drive, on the other hand, had been left discreetly inside Ricky's mailbox. And inside it, just a text file. "You're closer than you think." Sheriff Monroe, stubborn and skeptical by nature, was not satisfied with the complete exclusion of the accident report. He had seen with his own eyes the bodies, the box, the armed men. Yet when he tried to access the state records system, he discovered that nothing had been filed. The helicopter never crashed. The bodies never existed. The forensics never took place. He tried to contact Colonel Tate, an old acquaintance from his Army days. After 3 ignored calls, he finally received an answer. A single text message, sent at 1:43 a.m. "Don't ask anymore, for you." It was a short sentence, but loaded with something the sheriff knew all too well: fear. And not the kind of fear caused by war or violence. It was fear of the unknown. Desperate for justice, Monroe assembled a trusted team and tried to re-enter the accident zone during the night. But the forest was different. Surveillance towers had been installed. Drones watched over every access, and sensors buried in the ground set off invisible alarms. As they approached the exact point of the crash, sounds were heard coming from the ground, sounds that sounded metallic, intermittent, as if something was still moving beneath the surface. This was no longer an accident site. It was an active installation. A few days later, a farmer called Albert Reed took his memory card to the local computer store. He wanted to save the videos from his hunting camera installed at the edge of the forest, used to monitor wild boar. While reviewing the files, the technician noticed that, among the images of deer and common animals, there was a strange clip recorded at 03:17, less than an hour after the helicopter crashed. The video showed an intense light emerging from the middle of the forest, like a beacon rising from the ground. The camera then captured humanoid figures walking around the light, but there was something wrong with them. Their movements were disjointed, as if time around them wasn't working normally. The silhouettes trembled, the contours wavered, and the eyes, if they were eyes, reflected the light with a glassy, artificial glow. Albert tried to report the video, but in less than 24 hours his property was surrounded by military vehicles. They said it was an emergency tactical exercise. He was taken out of town for health and safety reasons. No one has seen him since. But the video had already been copied, and Ricky Delmar was now the new holder of Halebridge's biggest secret. Ricky couldn't sleep after watching the video. He analyzed it frame by frame, trying to understand what he was seeing. He noticed that one of the figures had no shadow, even under the intense light. Another seemed to emit heat, but the leaves around it didn't move with the wind. But it was when he froze one of the pictures that his blood ran cold. Behind one of the figures, something even bigger seemed to emerge from the earth, like a pillar or a backbone. The following night, he decided to go to the edge of the forest with a long-range lens. He stayed hidden for hours, watching. At around 3 in the morning, he heard what he later described as breathing too deep to be human. The trees bent back slightly, as if an invisible force had passed through them. And then, for a brief moment, he saw it. A shadow between the trees. Too tall, too wide. It didn't walk. It glided, and on what would have been its face, there were no features. Just a smooth, dark surface that reflected the stars like water. Ricky fell backwards, swallowed up by panic. When he got back to the car, everything in it had been searched. But they had left their equipment. They left it as a warning. During his investigations, Ricky found a name that appeared on an unofficial radio log from the night of the accident. Captain Dwight Harlan. The name was listed as the aircraft's flight commander, but did not appear on any military service records. Ricky had to resort to obscure internet forums, where ex-military personnel exchanged information without filters. One of them replied anonymously, "Harlan? He doesn't exist on paper, but everyone in the black sector knows the name." Harlan would have led operations known as containment officers, where the job was to recover unidentified objects, artifacts, bodies, technologies. His unit was informally called the Deniers. When something was discovered, they didn't investigate. They erased it. They didn't study it. They buried it, literally and figuratively. And, according to reports from former intelligence agency employees, Harlan had already commanded missions in 3 different countries, always with the same objective, to prevent anything from escaping. But the question remained, what was in the box that even he couldn't protect? And why, it seems, did Harlan and his team decide not to destroy the contents as they usually did, but to transport them? Perhaps the answer lay in another question that Ricky didn't want to ask. What if Harlan himself was trying to stop something inside the government? Ricky went back to studying the few visual records on the box, especially the symbol of 3 concentric circles. He posted a stylized version of the drawing on military symbology and cryptography forums, hoping for a response. For 3 days, nothing appeared, until a private message arrived. The sender used the username Ophiuchus7 and claimed to have seen this symbol before, recorded in documents from a top-secret program called Dormant. According to Ophiuchus7, the symbol represented triple stability, a reference to energy containments used in experiments with gravitational fields and exotic matter. There were no public records of this type of technology. It was pure theory for most scientists. But in closed and highly controlled environments, it had already been tested. Whatever was in the box then wasn't just biological or mechanical, it was unstable. By comparing the symbol with historical patterns, Ricky made another discovery. The circles resembled the ancient diagrams used by alchemists to represent spiritual containment. 3 layers of protection, 3 filters. The implication was terrifying. It wasn't just what was inside the box that mattered. It was what could escape from inside it if one of those layers failed. An anonymous email sent to Ricky's encrypted message box contained just one sentence: "Find Sergeant Ames. He knows." After days of research, Ricky tracked the man down to an isolated trailer in Arizona, hundreds of miles away. Sergeant Edward Ames was an Air Force veteran with a clean record until he mysteriously disappeared in 2017. When Ricky knocked on the door, Ames was slow to answer. He was thinner, paranoid, looking over his shoulder with every sentence, but he recognized the symbol immediately. He said he had taken part in a similar mission in Alaska in 2015. They recovered a structure buried in the ice, which also bore the same emblem. Inside, they found an artifact that caused alterations in humans, in animals, in the very climate of the region. Ames swore that what was in the Halebridge box was part of the same program, a sample, perhaps, a core. But he didn't believe it was being transported with the intention of studying it, but rather to activate it. They want to know if it works, and if it works, no one will be safe, not even them. Ames handed Ricky an old, blurry photo showing a box-like structure connected by cables to something gigantic, something that seemed to be pulsating. On the night of October 17th, Halebridge was plunged into darkness, a complete blackout, with no technical cause. All the generators failed. Cell phones turned off even with full batteries. The town hall clock went back to midnight and stopped. It was as if time had been slightly interrupted. Residents said they heard a buzzing sound in the air, like a radio wave at an inaudible volume, but perceptible to the body. Sheriff Monroe, who was on patrol at the time, saw the town's lights cascade out, like a row of dominoes. He tried to use the radio, but all he got was a crackling hiss, and for a brief second, a whispered voice said his name. When he returned to the police station, all the electronic equipment was fried. In the center of his computer screen, a single file had appeared. Opening was an error. In the forest, a pale blue glow was seen by several villagers. It seemed to be coming from underground. Some reported vivid dreams that night, all with the same theme, a presence watching from the sky. Others were unable to wake up until dawn. One elderly man named Thomas Finley suffered a stroke in his sleep and, in his last words, repeated, "They're back. Inside the box. They're back." Near the crash site, a structure had been hastily erected, presented as a temporary weather station, but Ricky obtained satellite images before the installation. What he saw was a hexagonal structure, surrounded by 8 emission towers, each connected by armored concrete tracks. Nothing there resembled climate research. And what's more curious, a team of armed workers was assembling everything at night, under red lights. A former U.S. Space Force engineer, on condition of anonymity, revealed to Ricky that the configuration resembled a resonance grid, theoretically used to contain or channel high-frequency energy. When Ricky asked what kind of energy, he hesitated. It's not energy as we know it. It's behavior, intelligent vibration. The journalist returned to the area in the late afternoon, and with the help of binoculars, managed to see something through the fog. The box was now connected to thick wires, as if it were being charged, or feeding something. 2 soldiers took turns keeping watch, and the presence of refrigerated trucks indicated that whatever was inside was still active, or needed to remain so. Finally, Ricky received the most revealing file of his investigation, an anonymous digital dossier, labeled Top Secret. Its name, Project Zero Surveillance. The pages described experiments carried out since 1984, with recognizably non-terrestrial entities whose presence on the planet predated humanity. The aim, monitoring and containment. Never contact, never activation. According to the dossier, the main entity had been sealed in multiple security compartments after an incident in 1996 in Antarctica, when a group of scientists suffered a simultaneous neurological collapse on hearing a sound emitted by the structure. Since then, fragments of it have been kept in safe zones, but one of them, classified as Segment Alpha 9, had shown a change, spontaneous activity. The file ended with a clear warning. If any fragment shows active synchronization, the dormant protocol must be terminated immediately. Do not allow proximity to electrical networks, magnetic fields, or ancient symbolic structures. The last line, in red, shivered in Ricky's eyes. The box must not remain in populated territory. During a freezing dawn, Ricky intercepted a radio transmission between 2 unknown agents monitoring the forest structure. Using an old adapted shortwave scanner, he managed to record snippets of the conversation. The voices were distorted, but it was possible to identify the urgency. One of them said, "The pulse pattern has increased, 3 beats per minute." The other replied, "The thing is learning from the human frequency. If it reaches 8, we lose containment." Ricky listened, motionless, as the operators discussed something called the reverse sensory recognition phase, a term that didn't exist in any common scientific document. But the implication was frightening. Whatever was in the box didn't just emit signals, it received them. It learned. It adapted to human presence. One of the agents said, in a low voice, "If it's listening to us now, it's already too late." On the recording, a final muffled sound made the hairs on the back of Ricky's neck stand on end. It was like a voice, but inverted, scratchy, coming from inside a well. Words that made no sense, but carried an intuitive weight, an implicit threat, and then silence. There were no more transmissions on that frequency for the next few days. The day after the interception, residents of Halebridge began to notice strange behavior in their electronic devices. Telephones rang with a single bell, but there was no one on the line. TVs would turn on by themselves in the early hours of the morning, displaying only static. And the most disturbing thing, some cars played specific songs on the radio, even when the device was turned off. Sheriff Monroe received several complaints, but knew there was no point in reporting anything to the government. Instead, he went house to house, writing down each case. The only thing all the reports had in common was the time, between 3 a.m. and 3:33 a.m. And in every case, the person who witnessed the phenomenon claimed to have heard the sound of breathing for a few seconds, inside their own home. The sense of surveillance intensified. Security cameras captured fleeting figures in corners where there was no one. The town priest swore that the church bell sounded alone every night, even after it had been removed. Something was indeed watching Halebridge, and it was using the town's own technology to spread. Like a parasite, it infiltrated the networks, the waves, the frequencies. Without any prior warning, the FBI blocked all routes in and out of Halebridge. The official justification was chemical risk following the crash of an experimental aircraft. But no civilian experts were called in. No evacuation was initiated. The barriers were manned by armed men with integrated masks who didn't answer any questions. Anyone who tried to leave was detained. Those who insisted disappeared. Ricky obtained a false permit and approached the south exit. He watched as a couple tried to escape in the early hours of the morning in an old Jeep. They were stopped, removed from the car, and taken into a dark tent. They never returned. Hours later, the Jeep itself was brought back to the road and abandoned, with the engine still running, as if nothing had happened. The town was now officially isolated. But the real question wasn't why Halebridge was locked down. It was when the government realized that it was already too late. The signals, the interference, the change in the box, everything indicated that what was contained there didn't need to come out physically. It was already spreading, even with all the blockades. Frank Walters was a retired truck driver, known for his calm temperament and his devotion to his 17-year-old son, Kyle. When Kyle disappeared during a bike ride on the trail near the forest, the same region near the containment zone, Frank began a tireless search, even under threats from the military. He was undeterred. Nothing mattered but finding his son. Frank searched every bit of the trail. On a stretch near an old fallen tree, he found the bicycle, folded in half like paper. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle, just the helmet, with the strap cut cleanly, like a surgical blade. He continued searching into the night, ignoring the cold, ignoring the presence of the watchtowers. On the 4th day of searching, Frank saw something. At the edge of the clearing, standing between the trees, was Kyle, or something that looked like him, but it wasn't blinking, it wasn't breathing, and its feet weren't touching the ground. Frank shouted, ran to him, but the figure vanished like smoke, and in its place, in the dirt, a word scratched with his fingernails. Open. In Halebridge's abandoned playground, a strange marking appeared in the sand of the old slide. Children, even though they were forbidden to go outside, still gathered there. It was they who noticed it first, a sequence of numbers and symbols drawn with absurd precision. Ricky recognized them immediately. They were geographical coordinates, but they pointed to a point below the city, underground, where there was no record of buildings. With Monroe's help, he accessed old mining maps. And there it was. A coal mine closed in 1932 after a mysterious collapse. The records of the time spoke of unnatural structures found in the depths. The miners claimed to have heard metallic sounds, like gears turning by themselves under the earth. Some spoke of lights, others of eyes. Ricky went to the site the following evening. The entrance to the mine was surrounded by new fences with activated sensors. But the most disturbing detail was another. In the sand, near the coordinates, there were small footprints, as if something had gone out and come back. But it wasn't human. The marks had 3 fingers, and at the end of the path, imprinted firmly in the earth, a spiral, just like the one on the box. On the edge of Halebridge, there was a forgotten cemetery, dating back to the 19th century. After the blackout and the recent strange events, reports began to emerge of residents seeing lights moving between the graves at night. The ground seemed to vibrate and the air was thicker. When Ricky heard that 2 soldiers had been seen leaving the site with shovels and soil analysis equipment, he decided to investigate. In the early hours of the morning, he and Monroe jumped over the back wall of the cemetery. They found the earth turned over on one of the oldest graves. The headstone was broken, and the records of the name had been erased with acid. 6 feet underground, what they saw wasn't a coffin. It was a box, smaller than the one in the helicopter, but with the same symbol. It had been buried there long before the crash. In the corner of the compartment, in a centuries-worn inscription, a date appeared, 1849, and below it, words in Latin, Custos inter mundos, guardian between worlds. Ricky was silent for minutes. That box wasn't unique. It wasn't the first. What fell from the sky hadn't arrived. It had returned. The same night of the discovery, the main box in the forest, now connected to multiple cables and surrounded by military equipment, began to emit rhythmic sounds. 3 pulses, pause, 3 pulses, pause. The pattern seemed random at first, until a local mathematician, consulted by Ricky, realized that the sounds corresponded to the pattern of inverted primes. It was a language, a code. At 3 in the morning, the box shook, all of it. Equipment recorded a magnetic field expanding for 3 kilometers. One of the soldiers was found unconscious with bleeding ears. Security cameras captured a silhouette appearing next to the box for exactly 0.7 seconds, something humanoid but incomplete, as if it was trying to cross over or be built on the other side. In the medical report leaked later, the soldier was said to have repeated only one phrase while delirious. "He's trying to be born." According to the sensors, the box's heart was increasing its rhythm. The rate was now equal to the human heart rate in a state of extreme fear, as if it were mirroring emotions, as if it were feeling. Halebridge's community radio station, WBR 91.5, was still running on its own generator. Early on a Monday morning, the evening announcer, Jerry Haynes, interrupted his usual program of classical music with an urgent bulletin. His normally calm voice was tense. "If anyone's listening to this, there's something wrong with the sky. It's not just the forest. It's the air. It's the whole city." The signal was interrupted mid-sentence. When residents tuned in again, all they heard was a recording being played on a loop, metallic beats in triple time, followed by silence. The radio studio was found empty hours later. No sign of a break-in, no Jerry. Just the microphone on and the sound system emitting that pattern uninterruptedly. A week later, a new recording appeared on the tower's transmitter, without anyone inserting it. It was Jerry's voice, but distorted, low, paused. He was saying, "I've seen what's on the other side. It has many names, but no face. Don't listen, don't look. Close the box, before it learns to open the next one." When they finally gained access to internal records, through a repentant agent who left a package on Ricky's balcony, the final revelation came. The box was a temporal gestation matrix. What was in it was not a living creature in the traditional sense. It was a pattern of consciousness, stored as energy, waiting for a body to inhabit. Documents attached indicated that the Air Force didn't want to transport the box, but to activate it. The Halebridge area had been chosen on purpose, an ancient seismic intersection zone, highly conductive mineral soil, and the historical presence of pre-colonial reports of lights, sounds, and disappearances. It was a point of contact. The contents of the box, according to the technical terms used, had already entered the neural projection phase. This meant that it no longer needed physical conductors. It could influence systems, people, machines, from a distance. And the next step, stabilizing a container, a body, or an entire city. Halebridge never had a chance. Ricky disappeared 2 weeks after sending his latest dossier by encrypted email to trusted contacts. The house was empty, the laptop destroyed. But a single handwritten note was left on the bed. "She's not contained. She's waking up." Today, Halebridge is listed on maps as a town banned due to chemical risk. But satellite images show strange lights at night, always pulsating in triple time. People report interference when driving on nearby roads. Some claim to hear voices inside turned-off radios, and others say they have recurring dreams about a box, buried under their houses. The question now is no longer what was inside the box, but how many boxes there are, how many have already been opened, and what will happen when they are all synchronized. Because if the entity was learning, and if it understood what we are, then perhaps it's too late to close it again.